A single father's Christmas Eve turned into a life-altering moment when he spotted twin girls abandoned on a snowy roadside. The truth behind their abandonment would shake him to his very core, challenging everything he thought he knew about family, sacrifice, and second chances. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. John Smith gripped the steering wheel tighter as his truck navigated the winding backroads of upstate New York. For hours, he'd been driving aimlessly, trying to escape the suffocating silence of his empty house on Christmas Eve. 3 years had passed since the accident that took his wife and daughter, yet the holidays still felt like an open wound that refused to heal. The snow had been falling steadily since afternoon, transforming the rural landscape into a ghostly white expanse. Wind howled against the windows of his vehicle, matching the hollow feeling in his chest. The former sheriff's deputy had volunteered for holiday shifts in previous years. Tonight, even that escape had been denied him. Just a few more miles, he muttered to himself, with no destination in mind. The heater hummed steadily, creating a cocoon of warmth that contrasted sharply with the frigid world outside. His headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating swirling snowflakes that seemed to dance hypnotically before him. Suddenly, something caught his eye, a flicker of movement along the roadside. John squinted through the windshield, his heart skipping a beat as the shapes came into focus. 2 small figures huddled together in matching pink coats, nearly invisible against the white backdrop of the storm. "What the hell?" he gasped, slamming on the brakes. The truck skidded slightly before coming to a stop. For a moment, he sat frozen, wondering if his grief-stricken mind was playing tricks on him. But there they were, 2 little girls, alone on a deserted road in a blizzard on Christmas Eve. John's heart pounded against his ribs as he threw open the door and stepped into the biting wind. Snow immediately clung to his beard and eyelashes, the cold cutting through his jacket like knives. Every instinct from his years in law enforcement screamed that something was terribly wrong. As he approached, the girls drew closer together, their tiny bodies trembling violently. Their faces were flushed red from exposure, lips tinged an alarming blue. The older child positioned herself slightly in front of the younger one, a protective gesture that spoke volumes. "Hey there," John called softly, kneeling in the snow to appear less threatening. "Are you two okay?" Their eyes met his, wide, frightened, and filled with a desperation that made his stomach clench. These weren't just lost children. These were children who had been abandoned. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Who would leave 2 little girls alone in a snowstorm on Christmas Eve? The wind howled around them, drowning out the sound of his own ragged breathing as John faced a moment that would forever alter the course of his life. John Smith knelt in the snow, his sheriff's deputy training kicking in, despite the years since he'd worn the badge. The wind howled around them, but he kept his voice steady as he addressed the 2 small figures in matching pink coats. "Sweethearts, are you okay? Where are your parents?" he asked, trying to mask his growing concern. The girls couldn't be more than 7 and 5 years old, far too young to be alone in such dangerous conditions. The older girl, Mary, stepped slightly forward, positioning herself between John and her sister. Her protective instinct was evident, even through her fear. "Our aunt said to wait here," she answered, her voice trembling but determined. "She said someone would come for us." John's experienced eyes scanned the desolate landscape. The rural backroads stretched empty in both directions, bordered by dense forest and blanketed in thickening snow. No footprints remained except those directly around the girls, already being filled by fresh snowfall. No vehicles, no houses, not even distant lights broke the isolation. "How long have you been waiting?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The younger sister, Sarah, peered out from behind Mary, her small face flushed from cold. "We've been waiting since the sun was up," she whispered, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest. John checked his watch. 7:23 in the evening. The December sun had risen after 7 and set before 5. These children had been abandoned in the freezing cold for over 8 hours. His blood ran cold as the realization sank in. "Did your aunt say who was coming for you?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice level. Mary shook her head, snowflakes clinging to her dark hair. "She just said to be good and wait." The girl's eyes betrayed a wisdom beyond her years, the kind that came from learning early that adults couldn't always be trusted. Sarah's teeth chattered audibly now. "We tried to be good," she added, as if their abandonment might somehow be their fault. John noticed their inadequate footwear, sneakers soaked through with melted snow. Their small hands were bare, reddened from cold. No hats, no proper winter gear. Only the matching pink coats, which he suspected were more for identification than protection. "You've been very brave," he assured them, making a quick decision. "I think we should get you somewhere warm now. My truck has a good heater." Mary hesitated, years of stranger danger warnings warring with their desperate situation. "I used to be a police officer," John added gently, understanding her caution. "I can help you find your family." The irony wasn't lost on him. He was offering to help these children find a family when his own had been shattered years ago. But something about these abandoned girls in the snow stirred protective instincts he thought had died with his daughter Emily. John Smith fought to control the rage building inside him as he guided the shivering girls toward his truck. What kind of monster would abandon children in this weather? The former sheriff's deputy had seen his share of cruelty during his years on the force, but this cut deeper somehow. "Come on, sweethearts," he said gently, opening the passenger door. "Let's get you warmed up." The girls climbed in hesitantly, their small bodies trembling uncontrollably. Mary, the older sister, kept a protective arm around Sarah, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. John cranked the heater to maximum, then reached behind the seat for his emergency blanket, standard equipment from his law enforcement days. "Here we go," he said, carefully wrapping the thermal material around their shoulders. "This will help." They huddled together under the silver blanket, two pairs of wary eyes watching his every move. John noticed how they clung to each other, seeking comfort in the only constant they seemed to have, each other. Their pink coats were pitifully inadequate against the upstate New York winter, and their shoes were soaked through with snow. John reached for his thermos, another habit from long nights on patrol. "Would you like some hot chocolate? It might help warm you up from the inside." Sarah's eyes widened at the offer, but she looked to her sister for permission. Mary gave a slight nod, and both girls accepted the steaming cups with trembling hands. "Thank you," Mary whispered, her voice small but determined to maintain politeness, even in crisis. As they sipped the warm liquid, color slowly returned to their cheeks. John let them drink in silence for a moment, not wanting to push too quickly. The cab of the truck became a temporary sanctuary from the howling storm outside. The only sound, the soft hum of the heater, and occasional sips from plastic cups. "My name is John," he finally said. "I used to be a deputy sheriff. Can you tell me your names?" "I'm Mary. This is my sister Sarah," the older girl replied, her protective instinct evident in how she positioned herself slightly in front of her sibling. John nodded encouragingly. "And can you tell me about your aunt, the one who left you here? What's her name?" Mary's eyes dropped to her cup, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She's not really our aunt. She just told us to call her that." The words sent an icy chill through John that had nothing to do with the blizzard raging outside. His law enforcement instincts kicked into high alert, recognizing the telltale signs of something deeply wrong. These weren't children who had wandered off or gotten lost. They had been deliberately abandoned. "What do you mean, sweetie?" he asked, keeping his voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. As John Smith drove through the blinding snow, the girls gradually began to open up. Their story emerged in fragments, pieced together between sips of hot chocolate and moments of hesitation. Mary, the older sister, spoke with a maturity beyond her years, while Sarah nodded silently, her eyes fixed on the passing snowdrifts. "Our mom, Angela, went to sleep and never woke up," Mary explained, her voice barely audible above the truck's heater. "The doctors said her heart just stopped. 6 months had passed since then, but the pain in her voice remained raw. With no relatives to take them in, the system had swallowed them whole. Their biological father had signed away his parental rights years ago. Neither girl had any memory of him. Since their mother's death, they'd been shuffled through 4 different foster homes, each placement more temporary than the last. We thought Miss Carroll might keep us," Sarah whispered, finally breaking her silence. "She seemed nice at first." John gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to keep his emotions in check. The woman they called Aunt Carroll had taken them in 3 months ago, but her interest had never been the children themselves. She collected the foster care payments while making it abundantly clear the girls were unwanted burdens in her home. "She would lock the pantry," Mary continued, her small fingers tracing patterns on the steamed-up window. "Said we ate too much. Sometimes we'd get 1 meal a day if we were quiet enough." That morning, Christmas Eve, Carol had woken them before dawn. She'd dressed them in their matching pink coats, driven them out to the deserted country road, and told them to wait. Their real family would come for them, she'd promised. Then she'd driven away, leaving 2 children alone in the gathering snowstorm. "She said we'd be happier with our real family," Sarah added, tears welling in her eyes. "But we don't have anyone else." They'd waited all day as the temperature dropped and the snow piled higher. No one came. No one except John, whose headlights had finally pierced the darkness hours later. The former deputy felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same righteous fury he'd experienced countless times during his law enforcement career when confronted with humanity's darkest impulses. But alongside it grew something else, a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt since the accident that took his wife and daughter. "You did the right thing by trusting me," John said softly, meeting Mary's cautious gaze in the rearview mirror. "And I promise you both, no one is going to abandon you again." John Smith's jaw clenched as he drove the girls toward town, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The snowstorm had intensified, transforming the rural roads of upstate New York into treacherous white tunnels. Each passing mile only fueled his anger, a slow-burning rage at what these innocent children had endured. As a former sheriff's deputy, he'd witnessed humanity at its worst. But abandoning 2 little girls in freezing temperatures on Christmas Eve reached a new level of cruelty. "Are we going to jail?" Mary whispered from the back seat, her small voice barely audible over the howling wind. "No, sweetheart," John replied, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're going somewhere safe. I promise." Sarah had fallen asleep against her sister's shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her after their ordeal. The truck's heater blasted warm air, but John couldn't shake the image of their blue-tinged lips and trembling bodies when he'd found them. If he'd been even an hour later, the lights of the small-town police station appeared through the swirling snow like a beacon. John parked as close to the entrance as possible, not wanting the girls to spend another second in the cold. He gently woke Sarah, whose confused eyes darted around fearfully before focusing on him. "We're just making a quick stop," he explained softly. "Then we'll figure everything out." The station was quiet, with only Deputy Jennifer Johnson manning the front desk. She looked up in surprise as the door opened, snow swirling in around them. "John, what brings you out in this blizzard?" Jennifer asked, rising from her chair. Her eyes widened as she noticed the 2 small figures clutching his hands. "Found them abandoned on County Road 8, he explained, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Someone left them there to freeze." Jennifer's expression darkened as John recounted the story. The deputy knelt down to the girl's level, her voice gentle but professional. Mary and Sarah clung to each other by the station's heater, their eyes hollow but containing the faintest flicker of hope. "Carol told us to wait for our real family," Mary explained, her small shoulders squared with a bravery no child should have to muster. "But nobody came except him." Sarah nodded silently, her gaze fixed on John as if afraid he might disappear if she looked away. The former deputy felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built 3 years ago when he'd lost everything that mattered. These children needed someone, and somehow, fate had placed them in his path on this snowy Christmas Eve. Jennifer Johnson sprang into action, her fingers flying across the phone keypad as she made one urgent call after another. John Smith watched her face grow increasingly grim with each conversation. The blizzard had paralyzed the region, blocking major roads and cutting off access to neighboring towns. The emergency foster care network was stretched beyond capacity, a common problem during the holidays when the system was already overwhelmed. "Nothing," the deputy said finally, hanging up the phone with a defeated sigh. "The closest emergency placement is 3 counties over, and with these roads," she glanced toward the window where snow continued to fall in heavy sheets. "The county shelter is our only option tonight." Both officers exchanged knowing looks. The shelter, while adequate, was a stark, institutional place, all fluorescent lights and echoing hallways. It was the last place either of them wanted to send 2 already traumatized children on Christmas Eve. "They'll be separated by age groups," Jennifer explained quietly. "Different dormitories." John nodded silently, his jaw tight. The thought of Mary and Sarah being pulled apart after everything they'd endured made his stomach turn. These girls had already lost their mother, been abandoned by their father, and discarded by their supposed caretaker. Now the system would separate them too. From the break room doorway, he observed the sisters. Mary was helping Sarah complete a jigsaw puzzle someone had left in the station. The older girl carefully guided her sister's hand toward the correct pieces, her face a mask of concentration. Sarah's tongue poked out between her lips as she focused, her small fingers finally connecting 2 pieces successfully. The smile that bloomed across her face was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Good job," Mary whispered, giving her sister a gentle side hug. Something shifted inside John then, a tectonic movement in a heart that had been frozen for 3 years. Since losing Emily and Jennifer, his wife, he'd merely existed, going through the motions of living without truly engaging. His house had become a mausoleum to memories rather than a home. But watching these sisters, their resilience, their tenderness toward each other despite everything, broke through his numbness like spring thaw cracking river ice. Before he could second-guess himself, the words tumbled from his lips. "I'll take them." Jennifer turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. "What?" "I'll take them," John repeated, his voice stronger now, more certain. "Just for tonight. Maybe longer. I still have my foster certification." He met his colleague's questioning gaze. They shouldn't be separated. Not tonight. Not after everything. Deputy Jennifer Johnson's eyebrows shot up in surprise, her professional demeanor momentarily giving way to genuine concern. "Are you sure about this, John? This is a big decision to make on Christmas Eve." John Smith nodded with quiet determination. "I still have my foster certification," he explained, his voice steadier than it had been in years. "It hasn't expired yet." He paused, memories washing over him like waves. "Jennifer and I got certified right before." He didn't need to finish the sentence. His colleague knew all too well about the accident that had claimed his wife and daughter. "We had dreams of filling our home with children," John continued softly. "We completed all the training, prepared the house, everything. Then the accident happened, and I just never canceled the certification." Jennifer squeezed his shoulder, understanding the weight of this moment. "Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways," she said. The necessary calls were made, paperwork expedited with remarkable efficiency for a holiday night. The county social worker on call was relieved to find an immediate placement for the girls, especially one that would keep them together. John's background as a former sheriff's deputy and his existing certification streamlined what would normally be a complex process. As John signed the temporary custody forms, he caught Mary watching him intently from across the room, her young eyes carrying wisdom beyond her years. She was holding her sister's hand, as she had been since he'd found them in the snow. "It's just for the holidays," he told Jennifer, though something deeper stirred within him. "Until they find a permanent placement." An hour later, John guided his truck carefully through the snow-covered streets toward his house. A vehicle moved slowly, carrying precious cargo that made his heart race with both anxiety and an unfamiliar feeling, hope. In the rearview mirror, he could see the sisters huddled together in the back seat, their eyes wide as they took in the Christmas decorations adorning the houses they passed. For 3 years, John had merely existed within the walls of his home, a ghost drifting through rooms filled with memories. He ate when necessary, slept when exhausted, and left for work each morning with relief. The house had ceased being a home the day the accident took his family. Now, as they pulled into the driveway, John realized he was bringing life back into those silent rooms. The girls' quiet breathing, their small movements, even their apprehension, all of it was infusing his empty house with something it had lacked for too long, the possibility of healing. Sarah gazed in awe at the modest 2-story house as John Smith's truck pulled into the driveway. Snow had settled on the roof and porch, giving it a picturesque quality against the night sky. "Is this your home?" she whispered, her small hands pressed against the window. "It's beautiful, like a house in a storybook." The childlike wonder in her voice caught John off guard. He hadn't seen his home through fresh eyes in years. "Yes, this is it," he managed with a weak smile, suddenly conscious of the Christmas lights he'd half-heartedly strung across the porch railing weeks ago. He helped the girls out of the vehicle, watching as they stood close together in their matching pink coats, Mary protectively holding her younger sister's hand. Inside, John guided them through the entryway, immediately turning up the thermostat. His footsteps echoed across hardwood floors in rooms that had grown cold with grief. The house felt cavernous and still, like a museum dedicated to a life that once was. Family photos lined the hallway, happier times frozen behind glass. "You can leave your coats here," he said, gesturing to hooks by the door. The girls obeyed silently, their movements careful and measured, as if afraid to disturb the quiet that permeated every corner. Upstairs, John paused at a door at the end of the hallway. His hand hovered over the knob, hesitating. He hadn't opened this door in 3 years. Emily's room, preserved exactly as she'd left it the morning of the accident that claimed both his daughter and wife. The pain of loss washed over him anew, but he pushed it back. These children needed somewhere to sleep. Taking a deep breath, the former deputy turned the knob. The door swung open to reveal walls painted soft pink, shelves lined with stuffed animals, and a small desk covered with cherished drawings. A twin bed with a floral comforter sat against one wall, untouched since he'd last tucked Emily in. "We can put the air mattress in here for one of you," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "The other can take the bed." Mary stepped forward cautiously, looking around with curious eyes. "Whose room is this?" "Remember what she asked, noticing the name Emily painted in wooden letters above the headboard?" John swallowed hard. These girls had lost so much already. They deserved honesty. "It belonged to my daughter," he said quietly. "She's not here anymore." He knew Emily would have wanted her room to shelter these lost children. Perhaps, in some small way, this was how her memory could live on, not in an untouched shrine, but in offering sanctuary to those who needed it most. With trembling hands, John Smith turned the doorknob he hadn't touched in years. The hinges creaked softly, as if protesting this intrusion into a sacred space. The door swung open to reveal a bedroom frozen in time. Soft pink walls adorned with butterfly decals, shelves lined with stuffed animals arranged in careful rows, and framed drawings hanging in perfect alignment. A small desk sat in the corner, art supplies still neatly organized, as if waiting for their owner's return. "Whose room is this?" Mary asked, her eyes wide with wonder as she took a tentative step inside. The little girl ran her fingers gently across the bedspread, treating everything with a reverence beyond her years. John's voice caught in his throat. He'd preserved this room exactly as it had been, unable to pack away the memories of his daughter. "It belonged to my daughter," he finally managed, each word feeling like glass in his mouth. "She's not here anymore." The former sheriff's deputy watched as the girls absorbed this information. Mary's face showed understanding beyond her years. She recognized grief when she saw it. Sarah, however, approached the situation with a child's innocent directness. The younger sister slipped her tiny hand into John's calloused one, looking up at him with those searching eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed walls. "Is she in heaven with our mommy?" she asked softly. The simple question shattered what remained of his composure. John knelt down to their level, a technique he'd used countless times as a deputy when speaking to children, though never with such raw emotion coursing through him. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment as memories of Emily's laugh echoed in his mind. "I think they're friends up there," he finally whispered, squeezing Sarah's hand gently. "Emily would be happy you're here." Mary moved closer, studying a photograph on the nightstand. A smiling girl with John's eyes, caught mid-laugh on a swing set. "How old was she?" she asked quietly. 8, John answered, the familiar ache in his chest both painful and somehow comforting. "Just about your age." Sarah wandered to the bookshelf, pointing to a well-worn stuffed rabbit. "What's his name?" "Mr. Hops," John replied, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Emily never went anywhere without him." The girls exchanged a look that communicated volumes, the unspoken language of siblings who had only ever been able to rely on each other. Mary spoke for both of them. "We'll be very careful with everything, I promise." John stood in his kitchen, staring at the refrigerator's contents with uncertainty. After years of microwave dinners and takeout, his culinary skills had atrophied. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, that was something he could manage without disaster. As he worked at the stove, he watched Mary and Sarah sitting at his kitchen table, their eyes following his every movement with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "It's nothing fancy," John Smith apologized as he set the plates before them. "I'm afraid I'm out of practice with proper cooking." The girls didn't seem to mind. They attacked the food with startling intensity, as if afraid it might disappear. Between eager bites, they remembered to thank him repeatedly, their gratitude painfully earnest for such a simple meal. "At Aunt Carol's, we only got one meal a day," Sarah confessed quietly, clutching her sandwich like it was precious treasure. "Sometimes less if we were bad." John's jaw tightened, anger flaring at this casual revelation of neglect. "What counted as being bad?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Mary answered while her sister ate, asking for seconds, making noise, sometimes just existing, I think. The former deputy turned away, busying himself with dishes to hide his expression. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his law enforcement days, but there was something uniquely heartbreaking about abuse disguised as caregiving. After dinner, John noticed their threadbare coats hanging by the door, the worn-through knees on their jeans, and shoes with soles barely attached. These children had been systematically deprived of basic necessities while Carol collected foster care payments. "I think I might have some warmer clothes upstairs," he said, leading them to Emily's room. The dresser drawers hadn't been opened in 3 years, but inside were neatly folded pajamas, shirts, and pants that his daughter had outgrown before the accident. "Are we allowed to wear these?" Mary asked, running her fingers reverently over a soft flannel nightgown. "Of course," John replied, his throat tight. "Emily would want you to have them." The girls changed into the pajamas, emerging from the bathroom transformed. For the first time since he'd found them on that snowy roadside, they giggled. A sound so unexpected and pure, it made his heart ache. While they explored their temporary bedroom, John gathered their dirty clothes and started a load of laundry. He added extra detergent, as if soap and hot water could somehow wash away the neglect these children had endured. As the machine hummed to life, he leaned against it, overwhelmed by a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt since becoming a father the first time. Tomorrow, he'd need to figure out next steps. Tonight, 2 little girls were safe, warm, and fed in his home. For now, that would have to be enough. As darkness settled over the small house in upstate New York, John Smith noticed Mary's shoulders tensing. The older girl had been quiet during their simple dinner, picking at her food while Sarah chattered about the snowman they'd built in the yard. Now, as he guided them toward Emily's old bedroom, Mary finally voiced what had been troubling her. "Mr. John," she whispered, her voice catching. "We don't have presents for tomorrow. Santa probably went to Aunt Carol's house." She looked down at her borrowed pajamas, too big but clean and warm. "Maybe we weren't good enough for presents this year." The resignation in her voice twisted John's heart. He'd seen that look before in his years as a deputy. Children who'd learned to expect disappointment, who believed they somehow deserved it. Sarah's eyes widened with alarm. "But we were good," she protested, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "Even when Aunt Carol yelled, we stayed quiet. We always did our chores." John knelt down, bringing himself eye level with both girls. The former sheriff's deputy felt a protective surge unlike anything he'd experienced since losing his family. "You know," he said gently, "Santa's very smart. He knows when children move suddenly." "He does?" Sarah asked, hope flickering across her face. "Absolutely. Sometimes he even leaves extra presents, just in case." John smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind Sarah's ear. "Don't worry about tomorrow. You're safe here, and that's what matters most." After reading them a bedtime story, one he'd read to Emily countless times, John waited until both girls were asleep, their breathing deep and even. Then he slipped downstairs and out to the garage, his breath fogging in the cold night air. In the far corner, behind boxes of holiday decorations he rarely used anymore, sat 3 sealed containers. With trembling hands, John pulled them forward, brushing away cobwebs and dust. Inside were the Christmas gifts he'd purchased for Emily 3 years ago, presents he'd never had the heart to give away or even look at again. A beautiful art set with colored pencils and watercolors, books about brave girls having adventures, a plush teddy bear wearing a tiny scarf. Tears blurred his vision as he carried everything inside, arranging the gifts beneath the modest tree he'd put up out of habit rather than joy. For the first time since the accident, the house felt less empty. The tree, with its twinkling lights reflecting off ornaments Emily had made in kindergarten, seemed less a monument to loss and more a symbol of something new beginning. John pulled out wrapping paper, scissors, and tape. There was work to be done before morning. With trembling hands, John Smith dusted off the boxes he'd kept hidden in the garage for 3 years. These were the Christmas gifts he'd bought for Emily that fateful year, presents that had remained wrapped, untouched, since the accident. Now he carefully arranged them beneath the modest pine tree he'd only put up out of habit, a mechanical gesture performed annually to mark the season rather than celebrate it. For the first time since losing his family, the house felt different. The tree, once a painful reminder of emptiness, now stood as a beacon of something new. Its lights cast a warm glow across the living room, where just hours before, 2 little girls had eaten their first proper meal in what seemed like forever. John reached for his cell phone and dialed Jennifer Johnson. The deputy answered immediately, concern evident in her voice. "They're asleep," he assured her, his voice low. "But they have almost nothing, just those worn coats and the clothes on their backs. "I'll bring some essentials in the morning," Jennifer promised. "How are you holding up?" The former sheriff's deputy paused, surprised to find himself smiling faintly. "Better than I thought. They need so much, Jen. That woman Carol, she was just collecting checks. The girls mentioned getting only one meal a day." Jennifer's outrage matched his own. "We'll make sure she faces charges. Those poor children." After hanging up, John walked through his home. Checking locks and windows, habits from his law enforcement days intensified by his new responsibility. He paused at the thermostat, turning it up another degree. The girls had been so cold when he found them. He couldn't bear the thought of them feeling that chill again. Upstairs, he peeked into Emily's room. Mary and Sarah were curled together in the twin bed, their small frames barely making an impression on the mattress. Their breathing came soft and even, faces peaceful in sleep. That night, instead of falling asleep in his recliner with the television murmuring in the background, his routine since the accident, John went to his own bedroom. He left his door wide open, listening for any sound from the girls' room. The house creaked and settled around him, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't the hollow emptiness that had been his constant companion for years, but something alive with possibility. As he drifted toward sleep, John realized he was feeling something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but unmistakably there, like the first green shoot after a long winter. John bolted upright at the sound of Sarah's terrified cries echoing through the hallway. His heart hammered in his chest as he rushed from his bedroom, still disoriented from sleep but driven by instinct. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 3 in the morning. When he reached Emily's old bedroom, he found Sarah curled into a tight ball, sobbing uncontrollably. Mary was already awake, her small arms wrapped protectively around her younger sister, whispering reassurances that weren't quite reaching through the fear. "I dreamed we were back on the road," Sarah whimpered between hiccuping sobs. "Standing in the snow, and nobody came for us. We kept waiting and waiting until we couldn't feel our fingers anymore." John sat on the edge of the bed, gathering the trembling child into his arms. Her tiny body felt fragile against his chest, her tears soaking through his t-shirt. "You're safe now," he murmured, reaching out to include Mary in the embrace. "I'm here. Nobody is leaving you out in the cold ever again." Mary watched him with eyes too old for her young face. "What if you decide you don't want us either?" she asked quietly, voicing the fear they both carried. "Aunt Carol said we were too much trouble. She said nobody would ever want both of us together." The former deputy felt something crack inside his chest. These children had been told they were unwanted burdens so many times they'd begun to believe it. He thought of Carol, collecting foster care payments while emotionally starving these girls, and felt a surge of protective anger. "Listen to me," John said firmly, making sure to meet both their eyes. "You are not too much. Not ever. You are brave, kind, and smart. What happened to you wasn't your fault." Sarah's crying had quieted to occasional sniffles. "Promise?" she whispered. "I promise," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "You deserve to be loved, and you're welcome here for as long as you need. Both of you, together." Mary studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she relaxed slightly against his shoulder. "Would you like some warm milk?" John asked, remembering what his wife used to make for Emily after nightmares. Both girls nodded, and he carried Sarah downstairs with Mary following close behind. In the soft glow of the kitchen light, he warmed milk on the stove while the sisters sat at the table, their fear gradually receding. As they sipped from mismatched mugs, John realized that healing would come in these small moments. Nightmares faced together, fears spoken aloud rather than suffered in silence. For the first time in years, he felt truly needed, and that feeling was slowly bringing him back to life. Dawn broke with laughter and whispers. The girls discovered the presents under the tree, their wonder lighting up the room. "Santa found us!" Sarah exclaimed, hugging her new art kit while Mary marveled over books and dolls. Their faces glowed with a joy John hadn't witnessed in his home for years. "He knew exactly what I wanted," Mary said, carefully opening a book about brave girls having adventures. She ran her fingers over the cover as if it might disappear. Sarah was already testing her new colored pencils, the concentration on her face intense as she began sketching. John watched from the doorway, a lump in his throat. The gifts he'd once purchased for Emily had found their purpose at last. The house, silent for so long, now echoed with the sounds of Christmas morning, paper tearing, gasps of delight, and the innocent belief in magic that only children possess. The doorbell interrupted their celebration. Deputy Jennifer Johnson stood on the porch, arms loaded with bags. "Merry Christmas," she said, stepping inside and setting down her burdens. The officer had brought winter coats, boots, and other essentials the girls desperately needed. "I picked these up from the department's donation drive," Jennifer explained quietly to John while the children explored their new treasures. "But I also have news." Her expression turned serious as she led him to the kitchen. "Carol was arrested last night," she said, keeping her voice low. "She confessed to abandoning the girls. It wasn't impulsive. She'd planned it for weeks." John's hands clenched into fists. "Why would anyone do that to children?" "Money," Jennifer replied, disgust evident in her tone. "She intended to report them missing after a few days, claim they ran away. That way, she could keep collecting the foster care checks." The deputy sighed, rubbing her forehead. "The system's already looking into placement options, but it's not promising. With no relatives from their mother's side, and their father having signed away his rights years ago, they'll separate them," John said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He glanced toward the living room, where Sarah was showing Mary a drawing she'd just created. "Most likely," Jennifer confirmed. "Finding a family willing to take 2 children, especially with their history of trauma." John watched the sisters, their heads bent together over Sarah's artwork, Mary's arm protectively around her younger sister's shoulders. In just one day, they had brought life back to rooms that had been shrines to grief. The thought of them being torn apart after everything they'd endured was unbearable. "What would I need to do?" he asked, his decision already made. "To keep them, both of them, together." Jennifer studied her friend's face, seeing determination replace the hollow look that had haunted him since losing his family. For the first time in years, John Smith looked fully alive. Jennifer Johnson's expression grew somber as she explained the harsh reality of the foster system. "Most families won't take siblings, especially 2 girls with their history. The system will likely separate them." She hesitated, watching John's face carefully. "I need to be honest with you. Mary and Sarah could end up in different counties." John Smith's response was immediate, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised even himself. "They stay together. I'll keep them, both of them." The words emerged not as a question, but as an unshakable declaration. Jennifer studied her former colleague, noticing something she hadn't seen since before the tragic accident that took his family. A fierce resolve that had replaced the hollow emptiness in his eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "More certain than I've been about anything in 3 years, John replied, glancing toward the living room, where the girls were playing. "They've lost enough already." Over the next days, the house on the outskirts of the small New York town slowly transformed. The refrigerator, that had held nothing but condiments and expired takeout containers, now displayed Sarah's colorful drawings alongside Emily's preserved artwork. The little girl's artistic talent was evident, even in her simple sketches of their new home, complete with a smiling stick figure labeled Mr. John. Mary's voice filled the hallways that had known only silence for years. She read aloud from her new books, asked endless questions about everything from how the heating system worked to why the sky turned pink at sunset. John found himself researching answers to questions he'd never considered, rediscovering curiosity through her inquisitive mind. The kitchen table, once buried under unopened mail and dust, now hosted meals and laughter. John learned to cook more than just grilled cheese, following online recipes with determination if not skill. The girls praised even his most disastrous attempts, having known true hunger in Carol's neglectful care. "This is the best spaghetti ever," Sarah declared one evening, sauce smeared across her chin, though the pasta was overcooked and the sauce came straight from a jar. "It's because we're eating it together," Mary added with wisdom beyond her years. John watched them eat, these two resilient children who had somehow found their way into his broken heart. The emptiness that had consumed him since losing his wife and daughter hadn't disappeared. It had simply made room for something new, something unexpected and precious. When Jennifer called to check on them, John's answer was simple: "We're figuring it out, day by day." John found himself rediscovering routines he'd abandoned after losing his family. The kitchen, once a shrine to frozen dinners and takeout containers, now filled with the aroma of home-cooked meals. He dusted off old recipe books, remembering dishes Jennifer had taught him years ago. The girls devoured everything with enthusiasm, even vegetables, which Sarah would carefully arrange into smiley faces before eating. Mornings transformed into a whirlwind of activity, packing lunchboxes with sandwiches cut into shapes, adding little notes that made Mary roll her eyes, but secretly tuck away. He learned to braid hair, though his first attempts left Sarah giggling at the lopsided results. The former deputy, who once faced armed suspects, now found himself confronting the mysterious monsters that Sarah insisted lived in her closet, wielding a flashlight with the same seriousness he once carried his service weapon. "There's no such thing as monsters," Mary would declare with the authority of an older sister. Though John noticed she never slept without her bedside lamp on, nightmares still jolted both girls awake, their cries echoing through the hallway. On those nights, John would appear within seconds, sometimes sleeping on their floor until dawn broke. The girls never mentioned it in the morning, but he noticed how they checked for his presence more frequently, as if reassuring themselves he hadn't vanished. During his monthly session with Dr. Mitchell, his grief counselor of 3 years, the question came that John had been asking himself: "Are you doing this to fill the loss left by Emily, or because these girls need you?" John stared at the framed family photo on the doctor's bookshelf before answering. "At first, I wondered that myself," he admitted. "But these girls aren't replacements. They're Mary and Sarah, their own people with their own hurts." He described how different they were from Emily. Mary with her analytical mind, always questioning everything, and Sarah with her artistic soul, seeing beauty where others missed it. When Sarah has a nightmare about being abandoned again, or when Mary tries to act tough instead of asking for help, that's when I know this isn't about my loss. It's about making sure they never feel unwanted again. Dr. Mitchell nodded, noting the change in John's demeanor, the purpose that had replaced emptiness, the way he spoke of future plans instead of past regrets. For the first time in years, John wasn't just existing. He was living, building something new without erasing what came before. By spring, the small upstate New York town had shed its winter coat. Splashes of green dotted the landscape, mirroring the new life blossoming in John Smith's once empty home. The girls had settled into a routine that felt increasingly natural, their presence filling the house with sounds John had forgotten. Backpacks dropping in the hallway, excited chatter about school days, and occasional squabbles over bathroom time. Mary had joined the school reading club, her love for stories growing with each passing week. She would return home clutching library books to her chest, eager to share the adventures she'd discovered. "Dad, you have to hear about this girl who found a secret garden," she'd exclaim, the word "dad" now falling from her lips with comfortable ease. John would listen intently as she recounted plots and characters, marveling at her analytical mind. Sarah, meanwhile, had caught the attention of her art teacher, Ms. Winters, who recognized something special in the younger girl's drawings. She has an extraordinary way of expressing emotion through color, the teacher had told John during a parent-teacher conference. Soon, Sarah was enrolled in after-school art classes twice a week, her confidence growing with each masterpiece she brought home to be displayed on the refrigerator alongside Emily's preserved artwork. The transition happened without ceremony or discussion. One afternoon in April, Mary returned from school, dropped her backpack by the door, and called out, "Dad, can you help me with my science project?" The word hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging its significance aloud. 3 days later, Sarah followed suit, asking, "Dad, can I have another cookie?" as naturally as if she'd been calling him that her entire life. The first time John heard it, he managed to maintain his composure until he could excuse himself to the kitchen. There, leaning against the counter, tears flowed freely down his face. Deputy Jennifer Johnson found him that way when she stopped by with some paperwork for the adoption process. "Hey," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" John nodded, wiping his eyes. "They called me Dad," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. Jennifer smiled. "You are their dad." That evening, as John tucked the girls into bed, he realized something profound had shifted within him. The pain of losing Emily and his wife would never disappear completely, but it now coexisted with the joy of his new family. Loving Mary and Sarah didn't diminish his love for Emily. Instead, it honored her memory by allowing his heart to heal and grow. 1 year after that fateful Christmas Eve, John Smith drove his truck down the same snow-covered back road where everything had changed. Mary and Sarah sat in the back seat, bundled in warm winter coats that actually fit them now, a far cry from the threadbare pink jackets they'd worn when he found them. "Is this the exact spot, Dad?" Mary asked, peering through the window at the roadside now transformed by a fresh blanket of snow. John nodded, pulling over carefully. "Right here is where I saw you both." His voice caught as he remembered the sight of 2 small figures huddled together in the bitter cold. Together, they stepped out into the crisp winter air. Sarah clutched a weatherproof container, while Mary carried a handwritten sign. With solemn purpose, they placed their offering at the roadside, a sturdy box filled with emergency blankets, non-perishable food, bottled water, and a prepaid cell phone. Mary attached their sign, "If you need help, you are not alone. Someone else might get left here," Sarah explained, her artistic hands adjusting the position of the box. "They need to know people care." The former deputy smiled, his heart swelling with pride. The girls who had suffered so much now thought only of helping others. This roadside memorial wasn't about their trauma, it was about hope. Later that afternoon, they arrived at the county shelter where John had almost taken the girls that first night. The facility director welcomed them warmly, accepting their donations with gratitude. Mary had spent weeks selecting books for every age group, carefully inscribing messages of encouragement inside each cover. "Books helped me not feel so alone," she explained to a volunteer, her voice confident now, so different from the frightened child of a year ago. Meanwhile, Sarah set up an impromptu art station. The younger sister had brought dozens of her drawings, colorful scenes of families, homes, and sunshine breaking through storm clouds. She helped each child create their own artwork, her gentle patience revealing how much she'd healed. At the community center, they served meals alongside Jennifer Johnson, who had taken her day off to join them. The deputy watched John with the girls, amazed at the transformation in all 3 of them. "You've created something beautiful," Jennifer told him quietly as they worked side by side. John watched his daughters, for that's truly what they were now, moving through the room, spreading kindness. "They taught me how to live again," he replied simply. That night, driving home with 2 tired but content girls, John realized they weren't just commemorating a rescue. They were celebrating the birth of a family forged not in blood, but in compassion, chance, and choice. That night, as John tucked them in, Sarah whispered something that stopped him in his tracks. Her small voice, still tinged with the slight stutter she developed after their abandonment, carried through the dimly lit bedroom. "Daddy, I think Emily sent us to you." John's hand froze on the blanket he was pulling up to her chin. The words hung in the air, innocent yet profound. Mary, lying in the adjacent bed, nodded solemnly, her eyes reflecting wisdom beyond her years. "So you wouldn't be alone anymore," she added, "and so we wouldn't either." The Forber sheriff's deputy felt his chest tighten. In the 6 months since finding the girls on that snowy roadside, he'd often wondered about the strange coincidence that brought them together. Him driving aimlessly on Christmas Eve, the girls abandoned on that particular stretch of rural New York road. John kissed their foreheads, one after another, overwhelmed with gratitude. He thought about how broken hearts somehow find each other in this vast world. His shattered by loss, theirs by abandonment. Yet together, they'd begun to heal. "Is it okay if we talk about her?" Mary asked softly, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blanket. "About Emily? Does it make you sad?" The question hung between them. For years, John had avoided speaking his daughter's name, as if saying it aloud would reopen wounds that never truly healed. The photographs remained on the walls, but the stories had gone untold. He settled on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. The nightlight cast soft shadows across the room that once belonged to his daughter, now transformed by drawings and books belonging to Mary and Sarah. "It makes me happy that you want to know her," John finally answered, smiling through tears that no longer felt like defeat. "She's part of our family story, just like your mom, Angela, is." Sarah reached out her small hand to wipe a tear from his cheek. The gesture, so tender and maternal, reminded him of Jennifer, his late wife, who would have loved these girls fiercely. "What was her favorite color?" Sarah asked. "Purple," John replied, the word coming easily now. "Everything had to be purple." "Like my drawing book?" Sarah exclaimed. Mary scooted closer. What books did she like? As the night deepened around their small house in upstate New York, John shared stories he hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years. The girls listened intently, occasionally offering comparisons to their own mother. 4 broken pieces forming something new, not perfect, but whole in its own way. 6 months after the adoption was finalized, John Smith sat at the kitchen table. Surrounded by handmade Father's Day cards, he ran his fingers over Mary's card, filled with carefully written words expressing gratitude for their new life. Sarah's creation was a colorful masterpiece, drawings of their family holding hands in front of their house, with a small angel floating above them, labeled Emily. "You're not just our dad," Mary said, her voice steady with the confidence she'd developed since that snowy Christmas Eve. "You're our hero." Sarah nodded enthusiastically, her artistic hands still stained with colored markers. "The best hero ever," she added, climbing onto his lap as naturally as if she'd been doing it her whole life. John wrapped his arms around both girls, his throat tight with emotion. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now resonated with laughter and occasional arguments about whose turn it was to choose the movie. Deputy Jennifer Johnson had told him just yesterday how different he looked these days, like a man who had found his purpose again. "I have something for you too," he said, reaching for a small box he'd hidden beneath the table. Inside were 3 matching bracelets, simple silver bands engraved with the date he'd found them on that deserted road. Mary's eyes widened. "It's like our family birthday," she whispered, immediately slipping hers on. "The day we became a family," John agreed, helping Sarah with the clasp on her smaller wrist. Later that evening, after tucking the girls into bed, Sarah in the bottom bunk, Mary in the top, both in a room they had gradually made their own, while keeping small mementos of Emily, John sat on the porch swing. The summer air was warm, so different from the bitter cold of their first meeting. In that quiet moment, surrounded by evidence of their love, bikes in the yard, a half-finished art project on the table, books stacked by his chair for their nightly reading, John realized the profound truth that had stunned him that Christmas Eve. He hadn't just saved Mary and Sarah from the cold, they had rescued him from a life of loneliness and grief. The former deputy understood now what true heroism meant. It wasn't just about dramatic rescues on snowy roads. It was about showing up every day, making lunches, kissing scraped knees, and creating a home where broken hearts could heal together. They had created a family not bound by blood, but by something far stronger, the unbreakable bonds of hope, healing, and love that had transformed three separate tragedies into one beautiful story of redemption.